last time inflation jumped this much, we were all listening to this. 21 years later, the PM is singing a similar tune.
We know those cost of living increases are real and we are taking action right now.
Yesterday we learned annual inflation is at 5.1% as petrol, groceries and housing costs continue to climb. With an interest rate rise now possible as soon as next week, Scott Morrison today blamed unique external factors.
We're in the middle of a global pandemic with a war in Europe. Those situations were not in place in 2007.
This is a Prime Minister that takes credit for everything that goes well and never takes responsibility when times are tough.
Honestly, maybe it's time to give somebody else a go, but something needs to happen here because people are at breaking point.
Scott Morrison began the day in far north Queensland, announcing an expansion of the Cairns Marine Precinct. But voters still have that new economic reality on their mind. Does this stuff affect the way you're going to vote in the federal election?
Yeah, absolutely, definitely.
I think it'll be a main driver for me.
I suppose for everyone that I speak to, it's like the rent, it's the living, like it's the housing situations. Like we can't afford to actually rent anywhere anymore.
The Coalition is hoping the rising cost of living will make voters nervous about Labor.
Do we put everything that everyone's worked so hard to achieve through the pandemic at risk? With a Labor Party and Mr Albanese.
Labor is hoping voters will question the Coalition's claim that they're the better money managers.
It's not good economic management if Australians can't get ahead. It's not good economic management if Australians are falling further and further behind.
And both will spend the next few weeks singing this old favourite.
Well, Hamish began the day in Cairns and he joins us now from the other end of the country in Hobart. Hame, you've been following Scott Morrison today. What impact is the inflation news having on his campaign, do you reckon?
Well, it's certainly going to place this conversation, this argument about cost of living at the centre of the campaign. There's no doubt about that. There'll be an arm wrestle between the Coalition and Labor about who's the best economic manager. What will supercharge it, obviously, is if the RBA lifts interest rates next week. The Prime Minister, of course, says it's a very different set of circumstances to 2007. That was the last time the RBA lifted interest rates during an election campaign. Of course, John Howard went on to lose that election. This time, though, rates are starting at historic lows. Back then, they were up around 6%. But I've got to say, it does something to your head as you watch the Prime Minister jump around the country at every stop, handing out millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars, in fact, off the back of years of billions of dollars worth of stimulus that they've pumped into the economy, saying, look, it's got nothing to do with us. This is all external factors. That, I think, is where the argument is going to lie for the weeks ahead.
This is a really interesting situation, Hamish, because on the one hand, with this and the Solomons issue, we've had the government on the defensive on national security and the economy. But at the same time, they're exactly the two areas that the Coalition dominates on. Like in poll after poll, that's the area, that's their strong point. So how do you see Morrison feeling about this? Does he feel on the defensive or is he just rapt to be talking about these areas?
I guess I can offer you no further insight to that, Waleed, beyond saying what it looks like on the ground when you see the Prime Minister and his team up close. I think they do relish the opportunity to talk both about national security and the economy. The Prime Minister loves to accentuate the fact that he's delivered 8 budgets in one form or another, whether it was on the Expenditure Review Committee or as the Treasurer or as the Prime Minister. He says, by contrast, Anthony Albanese's never delivered a budget himself. And of course, this is where that whole mistake at the beginning of the election campaign about the unemployment rate, Anthony Albanese, bungling that, does come back to haunt him. I think they do want this conversation. I think they are up for that fight because ultimately they know that voters on May 21 are going to choose between a government led by the Coalition or a government led by Labor. It seems to me from watching Scott Morrison up close that he feels he can make the argument to those undecided voters that if they're nervous about their interest rates, if they're nervous about petrol prices or the cost of groceries that they're buying each week, that now is maybe not the time to try someone that they're less sure about.
All right, Hamish, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, guys. See you soon.